Hello, everyone. I am Althea Walters from the Focus and Fulfill podcast. Now, today, my special guest with me, Tasha W, is here, and we're going to be talking about self discovery, self purpose. There's so many other things that contribute towards it, and I can't wait for Tasha to share with you. Tasha, she's the messenger of hope. And can you imagine the amount of things that she has to tell us about being hopeful for ourselves? So, again, I'm Althea Walters. I am a trainer, I'm a corporate trainer, I'm a productivity coach, and I'm a goal success coach. So, when it comes on to self discovery and self purpose, those things attribute to our goals and how we find ourselves. So, I can't wait for this interview. Tasha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. So Tasha, just gonna ask you to just bring us back in history a little. Tell us about your journey. Tell us what led you to now being and living in the role that you are.
Yeah, so I always tell everyone if I could sum up my entire journey from the beginning to where I am now, that word would be unconventional.
Mm.
And I say that because there are so many layers and levels in my life where I've learned who I am in moments and bits and pieces, and then really understanding the big picture. And so early on, myself, older brother, we grew up in a two-parent household. Where parents were high school sweethearts, both are very present, and having a father that like affirmed me and made me feel like I can conquer the world. And then at 16, all of that changed. My father had tragically lost his life from a work-related incident. It was completely unexpected. He was 41 at the time. So,
Oh,
that's
wow.
presumably young, right? And so at that point, I felt like the world that I once knew no longer existed. And so for me, it's like, okay, who's going to be that safe haven? Because the guy that I looked up to, the guy who I felt comfort in and, felt secure in is not here. So what do I do? And then at 16, life is very strange. You're still trying to figure out who you are, what you want to do, what's happening in life, beyond high school. And so, still not recovering from that, I said, you know what, I'm going to go to college. And for me, a lot of people don't know that college was actually my escape from my reality.
Oh,
Being born in a
interesting.
small knit community, everyone knew us, everyone knew our family, everyone knew who we were related to. And our lives were put on display because the accident was so public. Like, I mean, people were looking at us, wanting to know how we're feeling, how are we going to react, how are we going to respond. I mean, reporters came to the house, so it became very intrusive. And so for me, going to school meant I had the ability to reclaim my power back. So I
Yes.
thought, right? And then,
Your safe haven, your getaway.
yeah, exactly. And then shortly after that, I'm faced with another dilemma. I'm sexually assaulted by an acquaintance. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to enter into a new arena in my life, not having to deal with the trauma that I left behind. And now I'm faced with this. And so you can imagine perpetuated trauma. It just really came crashing down at that point. I hated myself.
To
I
deal
walked
with
around
at
with
that age.
yeah, I walked around with shame and guilt, right? And I blamed myself. I'm like, what did I do to make this person think it was okay? What did I have on for them to think that this was justifiable? So I'm going through all these moments in my head, and I became withdrawn. Um, I tore down all the mirrors in my place. I didn't want to see me. I just was so disgusted. I didn't recognize myself anymore. And so to me, the only thing I felt like I could do in that moment was to shrink back. So
Right, yeah.
I used to be that person that, talk to everybody, kind of engage in the crowd. And then once that happened, it was like a light switch. I completely turned off and shut down my emotions. And so that was my turning point for me.
Mm-hmm. Tasha, that's a lot. You have a very interesting story, interesting journey, and I can imagine if you went to give us all the details, we wouldn't leave here today. But so those life occurrences occurred for you, and that is, you had that turning point at the second life occurrence where you were shrinking. You were shrinking from who Tasha Wilson was made to be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when that started to happen, and I know in terms of persons who go through that, there are things going through their mind. You know, what was going through your mind, Tasha? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, so many things. I felt like my value diminished because of what happened. I started to really self-sabotage, thinking that I didn't deserve happiness. I didn't deserve good things happening to me. I felt like what I carried with that experience would be too much for someone to love me.
Yeah.
I felt like I was damaged goods ultimately. And in my mind, it was kind of like, am I even able to recover from this? You know, that was my initial thought. Like, what will life look like beyond this? You know, will I ever get to a point of remembering what life was like before this happened?
Yeah, yeah, those are some deep thoughts. You know, unworthiness, you use the word damaged goods. That's
Mhm.
deep. If you even deserve happiness. Can you imagine at that time in your life, just going through all of those things in your mind? Now, as you progressed, I know it would have taken a lot to come out of that place that you were. And here, you see this, the mind
Yeah.
keep us way down, you know.
Mhm.
So it would have been a little hard for you, but tell us, you know, how you eventually got yourself out of that stage.
So I did the first thing that I couldn't have imagined, which was I no longer silenced my voice. And so I told my best friend
Mhm.
what happened. And it
Okay.
felt freeing to tell my best friend what happened.
Mhm.
And with me sharing what was going on, she was able to provide the language for what took place. And
Mhm.
so even though she noticed that there was a difference in my behavior, she wasn't pushy with trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is going on. And she felt like whatever it was, I would tell her when I'm ready. And
Yeah.
but you know, once I told her, she's like, I knew it was something, but I didn't know to what extent. And
Mhm.
it felt good to have her hold space for me without judgment. Like
Ah.
she,
Mhm.
you know, didn't try to assume how I was feeling. She just let me talk. You know, and she didn't react in a way that made me feel worse than what I already did, you know?
Yeah.
And so that spoke volumes to me. And so once I said that and I shared with her, I was like, oh, so this is what it feels like once I finally released something. And to me, it was almost kind of like disassociating myself with what happened because I now gave myself the opportunity to speak up about it. And so, you know, once I shared, she started affirming me like, you know, you were so brave, you were so courageous, like to deal with this, but yet still stand. And she said, even though there are moments where you probably didn't feel like your best self, the fact that you're here and the fact that you trusted me enough to share this. So I was like, okay, okay. So that kind of was like the gateway for everything else. You know, I started journaling again.
Mhm.
You know, that was something that I had done before. Whenever faced with trauma, I'm like, okay, I'm going to write down my thoughts because I feel like I can just unveil when I, you know, write down my thoughts on paper. And, you know, even with that, I started reminding myself of my foundation, being raised in a Christian household and
Mm-hmm.
really referring back to my word and saying, okay, but who does God say who you
Mm-hmm.
are,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that even though I'm hurting, and even though this feels uncomfortable, it all serves a purpose. And, I had to acknowledge my feelings, but then I had to say, okay, what am I doing next? Because I may have fallen, you know, but how do I get back up? And so
Yeah.
it really took not relying on my strength, but really relying on the strength of God and saying, okay, I can't do this by myself. I surrender, I submit, whatever it is that you need me to do to get back to myself, to get back into who you knew I was all along. Help me. And so once I did that, the mirrors slowly came back up.
Yes.
I started, speaking life into myself. Like whenever I had a negative thought of thinking that, I didn't deserve love or I wasn't worthy, I would remind myself, no, I am royalty. I'm valuable. I'm precious. Um, God doesn't love me any less. Like who I am, it doesn't change. What happened to me is a part of my journey, but it's not my identity. And so using that and being consistent, because after a while, even when you start saying things, you may not believe it in that moment, but eventually
Exactly.
eventually you will. And so it got to a place where what I was saying and speaking to myself, I started showing up for myself in other
Mm-hmm.
spaces. I really became that authentic person that I knew I was always created to be.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I could sit here and just listen to you, Tasha. You shared so much, and you mentioned your best friend. You mentioned how, there was just somebody holding space for you
Mhm.
without judgment.
Yeah.
But you took the the chance of sharing with that person because it don't matter. You hear my pato coming on now. I was trying to hold it back in, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how close persons are to you after going through that. There's
Mhm.
no guarantee that you're just going to open up to people. There's no
Mhm.
guarantee. But you were bold enough and brave enough to take that step, to take that chance to share it with somebody.
Mhm.
And a lot of people who are going through those things in life, not everybody has that level of courage to share.
Yeah.
But you realize that from sharing, um, it freed you.
Yeah. It did.
Yeah, it freed you. And the more you continued sharing, the freer you were able, and that was able to pull you out of that rut.
Mhm.
So that's great. You spoke about her affirming you
Mhm.
after. So you realize that all of these things are coming together for
Mhm.
you. It was helping to pull you out and to build up at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then doing your journaling and then seeking out your external source, going back to faith, going back to God, going back to your foundation principles. Whilst these things, I know it must have taken a time for you.
Oh yeah.
It must have taken a time for you.
It did. And it was so interesting because even while doing those things, there were still questions that were unanswered, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, closure was important, because I felt like in the incident with my father, right, and going through that grief, I felt like our family didn't receive the closure that we deserved. So closure was just big for me. And so in this situation, I'm like, okay, because after it happened, a semester later, he's not even enrolled in the school anymore, right? And so I'm like,
Mm,
I can't even face him to say what I want to say, right?
yeah.
Or, even address him, right? It's just kind of like, okay, so what do I do with this, right? And then just wondering why, like, why did you think that this was appropriate, or
Why
why
was
is there
right?
no level of accountability? Because um to be quite honest with you, you could tell it was premeditated on his end. And you could tell that
Mhm.
this was a familiar space for him. Like, I
Mhm.
definitely wasn't his first person that he's done this to. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the last. Right. And so it's just kind of like what goes on through your mind to think it's okay. But I understood that closure, the way that I wanted to happen, wasn't going to, and that I had to be okay with that. But it didn't mean that I wasn't going to have closure at all. And so for me, closure looked like forgiving myself and then ultimately forgiving him and forgiving myself and saying that, hey, it's not your fault. It never was your fault. And this situation, honestly, had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with what he thought was appropriate, because there's some things that he needs to work out internally, clearly, and then really forgiving myself to shrink back and not be who I've always been called to be, and
Exactly.
allowing this situation to overtake me the way that it did. And so, you know, not living a life of regret and saying, you know what, this is my story. I'm going to own it. And whoever thinks it's too much are not my people. And, that's how
Yes.
I took it. And so,
Yes.
that was my closure to say, this is just a part of the step of your process, but it's not the end all be all. And really
Yeah.
understanding that if I fully trust God the way that I say I do and the way that I live my life, I know that what happened to me, it's going to come back full circle. And so when I said that and I believed it, it started happening. I became a member of the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. It's a way
Mhm.
for us to come together and say, you know what, this is my story. Let me hear your story. We sit there,
Yes.
we empower each other, we advocate for other people who may feel like they're not ready yet to share.
Yeah.
And then the fact that I'm able to touch people across the world by sharing my experience alone lets me know that just because this happened, it didn't change my purpose in life at all, which was to help people, which was to inspire and empower people. But it just came from a different perspective that I didn't expect. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And earlier you said that what happened is a part of your journey and a part of your story, but not necessarily your identity,
yeah.
because you were already chosen to be, right?
Hmm.
So, and acknowledging that, I think, is empowering in itself, because it made you be able to step beyond to continue to build who Tasha is meant
Yeah.
to be. So
Yeah.
that's great. So would that, in terms of self-discovery, would you say at that point in time, the whole self-purpose and self-discovery just started to evolve?
Yeah. I would say the moment I made the mindset change, when I said, okay, this is the aha moment, forgiveness. And really understanding that it had to take a circumstance that made me uncomfortable to really soar into who I already was. Because I was so comfortable with being comfortable and not being in the spotlight and, passing the buck to somebody else and say, here's an idea, why don't you try it? But this challenged me to step forth as a leader who God had already identified me as. And it
Yeah,
took something to provoke me to say, you know what, you can't sit back on this, because what you have to share is now going to ignite the flame in somebody else to say, you know what,
absolutely.
I have a voice too. And what I have to say is valuable. And so for me, that self discovery is like, wow, everything that my dad had even told me, growing up, I see it in fruition now. Like, oh my goodness, because he always told me, you are wise beyond your years. He would always say that. And he was like, for you always can pick up what's going on in a room. He said, even when you're subconsciously doing it. And I noticed that even now, like I can just know when someone is not having a good day, and then I know how to encourage them. Or I know if someone is having a great day and they're just not used to hearing affirmation. So I'm like high fiving them and celebrating. And so
Yeah.
it's like, if it weren't for this, then I would not be in a space that I am to just be comfortable enough to approach people and say, hey, what's going on? Or, how are you doing? Or, what you have, don't keep it to yourself, kind of thing. And so it just really extended who I am just to another dimension.
Wow, I love that. And the fact that your father started planting seeds from early out, started building you up from early out. We didn't even know where it would have ended, where where it would have landed, influencing who you are so greatly today. Uh, so the self-discovery, a lot of times persons will be like actively saying, I need to find my purpose, I need to discover who I am, and everybody is just actively. Is it something that actively you seek, or it is there and then you will stumble on it? How would you describe that?
So it's funny because for me, it's always been there. I just didn't recognize it, right? I allowed the filter of
Yes.
life to blind my vision of who I was. And so when I think of self-discovery, it's like you get these little hints, you get these
Yeah.
moments, right? That are saying, hey, that's who you are, hey, this is a part of your purpose. But I
Exactly.
think sometimes we're afraid to tap into that because we're just unsure or uncertain of what the outcome will be. But I think that's the best part. Because when you don't have the full picture, it allows you to be more vulnerable and honestly more open. If we had all the tools all at one time, I think if we'd be in a world full of trouble.
Yeah, we would abuse it.
Yeah, and I really think it shows the humility when you say, okay, I'm getting a snapshot, but where is this going to lead me? And so once you see certain elements, you just remember those moments. Like for me, I can go back in time and like, oh my gosh, this makes sense as to why I am who I am. This makes sense as to why I respond this way. And it's just kind of like that reminder that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing that you need to fix. You
Yeah.
can evolve, you can grow, you can transform, but don't view yourself from a place of lack or defeat.
Yeah. Great. And yes, there's so many little hints that we get along the way, but sometimes we're looking for something so big,
Mhm.
something way over yonder when we do have it right in front of our faces, or we
Yeah.
see other people doing things and we think that it should look like that.
Yes.
We do think it should look like that, but really and truly, the things are there and it will be defined as you. So
Mhm.
I like that in terms of sharing. What are some of the lessons though outside of that you would have learned about self-worth, self, self-love along the way? What are some of the lessons?
Oh goodness. Validation. So one of my biggest lessons is stop trying to seek validation from people, places, and things. Know that you are enough and know that your identity alone is secure in Christ. And I think it's just like we always try to seek out people and what they think. We try to get this need for approval, but it's like you don't need permission to be you. You really don't. And so I think with the understanding of knowing that you are enough and actually do the internal work, I think is
Yes.
what really helps kind of get you to that point of saying, okay, I am enough, and I understand that what I have to give is just as valuable as the next person. And so it's like we're trying to seek approval from people who don't have it all together either. You
Yeah.
know?
We
So
see them and we think they got it together.
yeah, but they don't. They don't. And I
They're
always
trying to figure it out like they're trying to figure it out like us.
exactly. Exactly. And it kind of goes back to the old saying of don't judge a book by its cover. Like just because they look the part on the outside, what are they really hiding from? What are they really trying to cover up and not deal with? And so it's like we put too much power into the hands of others, and then we put too much pressure on ourselves to try to measure up to somebody else's expectations.
Exactly, exactly. So don't seek validation because we are enough. You are enough. And that, once we have that, we'll be able to focus a little bit more on ourselves. A lot of times we try to look external, focusing on, but we are enough and we have everything we need. We do. We
Yeah.
do have everything we need. So sometimes it's amazing, but I know it's not as easy. We say it, but it's not as easy.
Mm-mm.
The mental work, I can tell you, it takes a lot. It takes a lot. So I'm very grateful for even how you are using your gift and your experiences to share and to impact other people, because I know it's the struggle is real, it's very real. So I appreciate that. The lessons that we learned, if it is that there's one thing that you wish you knew probably 10 years ago, what would that be that you could apply now? One thing.
Embrace the greatness within. I think for me, I've always tried to be someone that I wasn't because I didn't believe in myself enough. So, when you have those core people in your life who believe in you, you have to make sure that the belief you have in yourself either matches that or supersedes that, and really understand that everything that you're looking for and everything that you need is within you. And so you embrace that and understand that your life truly has purpose.
Yes, embrace the greatness you have within you. I love that. There's so many gems, and there's so many tips, and there's so many strategies that you shared with us. I know my audience is, they will be so happy to receive it. It was a very great way in how you shared, and the impact that you continue to have on the lives of other people is profound with your story and your experiences. Tasha, tell us a little, as we're wrapping up, tell us a little bit about your business and how you help persons and where we can.
Yeah, so I'm an author. I authored 3 books. My latest one is called Recognize Your Opponent When Your Greatest Enemy is Your Inner Me. And it really talks about captivating the thoughts that you have about yourself, and really dismantling those myths and really unpacking the boxes that you have once held yourself in. And what I love about that book is that it challenges you to unpack the boxes in your own life. So yes, I share my experiences in that book, but then it gives you space to have some reflection questions, and then to write and really unpack that. Because I think sometimes in our self-discovery journey, like you said, we don't give ourselves enough grace. We just think that it's an instant gratification, a quick fix, but it's a continual process. And so that book kind of reminds you that, it's not a race,
Yeah.
but enjoy where you are in the moment. And give yourself grace while you're there. And then I also am a coach. I do group coaching for millennial women, and we really unpack what I call it's unmasking the inner me, and it really owns in on the identity piece. Who are you first? Right. And then once you identify yourself, how does that connect with your purpose? And then how can you remain in alignment in order to live the abundant life that you've always been called for? So I really enjoy those sessions because I just love hearing the details of someone else's story and how they have their aha moments to say, okay, what was once considered a battle scar is now my beauty mark in the earth. So
Right.
I love it. And then outside of that, I do, speaking engagements and things like that. I just love being able to connect with people on different levels. So you can find me at my website, which is www.lifewithtashaw.com. And there you will just be able to get a peek of my world, what I do and the things that I'm connected to. And then I'm also on Instagram, and my handle is Life with Tasha W _.
Okay, so that's Life with Tasha W _ on Instagram. And the website is www.lifewithtashaw.com. So,
Yes.
Tasha, it has been awesome speaking with you, having you on the Focused and Fulfilled podcast. Continue on your journey. I can see you making such a difference in persons' lives, continuing to impact persons um, positively, and continue to hold space for those persons who need space. I know you're doing a good job at that. Any last words just to give our audience? Any last inspiration? Any last message?
Yeah, something that I always say that I want people to walk away with is your life has purpose, your voice has value, embrace the greatness within.
Awesome. Your life has purpose and your words have value. Embrace the greatness within. Absolutely. We couldn't have ended no other way. Tasha, thank you so much for sharing. It has been an awesome conversation. And I know my audience will be so enriched with this information that you shared. So that's it. I'm Althea Walters. I am the host for the Focused and Fulfilled podcast. And today my guest was Tasha W, Messenger of Hope. We shared about self-discovery, self-purpose, self-worth, and self-love. So many things inside of this podcast. And I can't wait to share it with you. Good evening, good night, good morning from wherever you're listening to. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.